Good morning. We will be starting our webinar in about 5 minutes. Selena, we can hear you. Please mute. Good morning, Claudia. Thank you. Okay, it's 2 minutes. We'll be starting in exactly 1 minute. Shalini, you having visitors, are you? It's interesting as we're
I've got a kid in the room, even though I put a note on the door.
I know. Amazing. Well, we're all working from home and having to make do with these different things.
I should maybe try and get them to learn the material so they can do the webinars.
Exactly, or at least tech for you. Okay, let's get going. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We were expecting over 200 of you this morning. That's why everyone has been muted. I want to welcome you to the OCASI webinar series for frontline practitioners. This is our town hall number 1 for the month of May. Everyone will be on mute. Please use your question box. If you look on the right side of your screen, you will see a box, a line that says questions. Please use that box to write your questions. I will read them out. Please write your questions as they come to you and not wait until the last moment so that we have a nice flow. We are very pleased to welcome our expert panelists this morning, Shalini Konanur. Shalini is the Executive Director of the South Asian Legal Clinic, Ontario, and a steering committee member of Color of Poverty, Color of Change, a coalition that OCASI works very closely with and is a founding member of, concerned with issues of economic and racial justice. Shalini will take about 10 minutes to do an overview of the situation, COVID, immigration, and the various benefits that's been announced, particularly at the provincial level, but we'll also take a look at the federal level. Once she's finished speaking, then we will go to your questions. We have about 90 minutes together. Again, welcome. Please, let's make this as interactive as we can using text and Shalini's voice. I will take myself off camera now. Shalini, you're on. Thank you for agreeing to be with us this morning.
Well, thank you for having me, and good morning, everybody. I'm always looking in the wrong direction, so hopefully I'm looking right at the camera. I'm going to spend just about 7 to 10 minutes kind of running you through some of the things that have been going on. I think what's been most difficult around COVID-19 and the work we do is that things are constantly changing. The information that we get is constantly moving, and not all of it is clear. So that becomes hard when especially you're working on the front lines with clients and people in community to be able to tell them and guide them around what to do. I'm going to take you through some of the issues that have come up at our legal clinic, which I suspect are going to be really similar to the issues that come up for you in your day-to-day work. And then we'll have some good time to chat and think about your questions and things that are coming up and the ways in which we can also advocate together around some of the needs that have been missed. First, I'm going to just start with an overview of some of the things happening at the province in terms of income supports and other pieces that will impact us. And so most of you may know, but if you don't, we have some emergency measures in the province, both related to social assistance and to emergency assistance that are available to low-income clients. So the first piece to know, and there was a recent announcement that this has been extended, is that people who are already on Ontario Works or Ontario Disability can continue to apply for a flat rate emergency payment. That is a payment that would be given to them if they have additional COVID-related expenses. For a single person, $100, and for a family, $200. In the old wording of the announcement, it said up to 100 or up to 200, which seemed to kind of suggest that they might be making different decisions for different people. I saw a more recent announcement just this morning that it's likely that everyone should be getting a flat rate. So if you do have clients who are not getting that amount, that's something to think about why that's happening, and even contact us or your local legal clinic to figure out if there's something that can be done there to make sure that those clients get that much needed support. Granted that we already know social assistance rates in Ontario are way too low for most of our clients. This, though, is a benefit that's just related to COVID-19. The other piece that's come up a lot in our work is people who were not previously low income, but who are now low income. And those people, and whether they would be eligible as new applicants for Ontario Works or Ontario Disability. So there are a few things I wanted to raise there for you to keep and pass on to your colleagues in mind. There's no change in the criteria for being eligible for social assistance. So people still have to be low income, they still have to meet the asset levels, and they still have to meet the part that many of us are struggling with around immigration status to qualify. And so there's been a big question around who and what types of people with what types of immigration status will qualify for social assistance benefits. And this is a group of people who would not qualify for federal benefits, which is actually quite a large group of people who can't qualify for the CERB or other federal benefits. And so generally, and I know you've had training, or some of you have probably attended the Chinese Southeast Asian Legal Clinic training around this that OCASI ran, I think at least a month ago, which talked about some of that eligibility criteria. But generally, I will say to you that what we are pushing for, obviously, Canadian citizens and permanent residents will always qualify for social assistance. And we feel that temporary workers, international students, and temporary resident permit holders should qualify. And why I say should is that for someone like me, the law is clear, but the way in which different regions apply the law is different. So we've seen inconsistency from our clients across the province in terms of regions making decisions on who will qualify and who won't. And so I would urge all of you in those cases where people are denied social assistance and there's an immigration issue to have a consult with your local legal clinic or contact the South Asian Legal Clinic. And I'll say really clearly on this call, although our name is the South Asian Legal Clinic and we work primarily with South Asian clients, during COVID, we will speak to anybody who contacts us. These are emergency needs for people, and we're not going to put up more barriers in terms of eligibility to our service. So if you have clients who need to speak to someone and you can't find the appropriate resource, please feel free to contact us. In those cases where people are turned down for social assistance and they're not sure if the decision was correct or not, that's the time they should consult with someone to see whether there is a case to be made. In those cases where there is a case to be made, all of the mechanisms for internal reviews and appeals are still going ahead, so all of those processes are still available to you. The other piece that is coming up a lot is calls from clients around, if I'm getting social assistance, can I still get served? Some people can, right? And so what has been clarified for us from the province is that if you are already on Ontario Works or Ontario Disability and you get the CERB, they have exemptions of part of the income. So part of the income will be exempt. The rest of it will be deducted from your benefits, but they have very also clearly stated that you will not be cut off social assistance. They will drop you down to a nominal amount, but you will be allowed to keep your drug benefits, which is a really critical piece for a lot of clients. So clients should not be worried about getting both and then being cut off social assistance. We have an assurance from the province that that will not happen. The difference is if you're a new applicant for Ontario Works or Ontario Disability after March 1st, then your income from CERB is treated differently. It is deducted dollar from your social assistance. So you don't get those income exemptions that a person who is already on social assistance would get. So there is a distinction there that is made. So when you're working with clients, you have to know the date on which they went on to social assistance. In terms of other provincial things that might be of interest, there is clear direction from the Ministry of Health that uninsured clients in hospital will not be charged any fees for COVID and non-COVID related illnesses that need to be treated. And by way of example, though, we know from working with doctors that hospitals are not applying this policy uniformly. This past week, I worked with a client who came as a visitor and was diagnosed with cancer. So had to go to Sunnybrook for emergency cancer treatment that was required. And Sunnybrook was insisting on charging. We had to do quite a bit of advocacy with Sunnybrook around the policy directive from the Ministry of Health. They rescinded all of the charges and have agreed that they were misapplying what was happening and will going forward will not be charging clients and will also be refunding those that they had mistakenly charged from March 25th onward. So that's good news. Same thing happened at Sick Kids Hospital 2 weeks ago, but a group of incredible doctors there did some amazing advocacy. And so hospitals are slowly starting to get the message, but I think the communication strategy at the provincial level probably hasn't been as effective as they wanted it to be because many hospitals are not. The bigger question is, what about outside of hospital treatment? What about all of those uninsured people in Ontario who don't need to go to hospital but need treatment? I can give you an example. I'm working with an international student who is now pregnant. So she needs prenatal care and she needs treatment. The doctor is requiring it, but the doctor is trying to charge her for every visit. The problem with the current policy directive from the province is that for doctors outside of hospital, it is voluntary for them to not charge. They have created codes for the doctors to get paid from the province outside of the OHIP scheme for treating uninsured clients outside, but they have not made it mandatory for doctors to do that. Doctors can charge if they want to. And many doctors, I think, are not charging, but we have some doctors who don't want the headache of dealing with that new scheme of trying to get paid and would rather charge. So if you come across those cases, there is advocacy to be done with doctors to try to push them forward. There is a huge uninsured network in an organization called OHIP for All, made up almost exclusively of healthcare providers and doctors who will also do advocacy and push back. So those resources are available if you have those types of clients. So the other piece that's really critical on the provincial side is the Ontario COVID-19 emergency assistance piece. It says very clearly that that emergency assistance is for people who do not want to apply for social assistance, but need some help. And that's a big group of people. There's not as much detail on the emergency assistance benefit about who qualifies and who doesn't. The only thing that they state in the application in the website is that tourists and visitors don't qualify. That is the only thing they state. So when I read that, I take that to mean anybody else would qualify. And we have been successful in getting out of status people and others benefits through the Ontario Emergency Assistance. The other piece that has been interesting for us that we've worked on and been successful on is that idea of visitors, because we have a group of people now in Ontario who are essentially stuck here. And in my view, those are no longer visitors because they can't actually leave. There are bans for them to be able to return to their countries. There's inability to travel, all sorts of things. We've been successful in several regions in arguing they're not actually visitors anymore. They're stuck because of this unique situation and have been able to draw from that fund. That is going to be a case-by-case basis decision. It will depend on the region that your client lives in. It will depend on the caseworker, decision maker who's making that decision, but there is advocacy that can be done there. It may not always be successful. If they take the hard line that the person is a visitor or tourist, they may have an issue. So that's a place where many people, including OCASI, is still advocating to get clarity from the province on supports for that group of people. As far as we know so far, there's not a lot in the way of rent support for tenants who cannot pay rent, but there is clearly a provision saying that there are no evictions that are going to take place during COVID-19. So what we know for our clients who cannot make the rent is that landlords can still serve them with notices for failure to pay rent, but they will not be able to go to the landlord and tenant board and get eviction orders and effect any type of eviction. What we haven't talked about at the provincial level yet is what happens after COVID-19 ends. And we have thousands and thousands of tenants who owe significant amounts of back rent, right? And a lot of work is being done by housing advocates to make sure that the board will not will not be making decisions to arbitrarily evict tenants, but will be creating a process by which either rent is forgiven or rent can be paid in a much longer period of time. The other thing that a lot of our clients have spoken to us about is paying other bills. You know, mortgages, utilities, loans, hydro, bank rates, all of those things. There isn't great uniformity on that. What clients need to do is they need to contact the individual institutions, and every single one will have a different sort of process for deferrals, getting rid of interest, all of those kinds of things. I have encouraged many clients who have car insurance, if they're no longer driving, you have ability to stop your car insurance payments until you start driving again. So there are all sorts of opportunities to defray costs, and depending on the client's situation, they can think about what is beneficial for them. The only problem is this is an incredible amount of bureaucracy and admin work on clients' behalves during an incredibly stressful time in people's lives. So sometimes that becomes challenging. So we as frontline workers then have to think about what level of support we can provide on those pieces, right? So I want to move a little bit to the federal benefits. Of course, EI is still available. And so we've had a lot of questions from people about how that interaction works between EI and CERB. So EI is still available as it always was for anybody who loses their employment, right? So if you lost it post, the critical date is March 15th. If you lost it before March 15th, you would have applied for EI already and you would continue to get it. If you lost it after March 15th, there's a question, do I apply for EI or do I apply for CERB? What we recommend for people actually is, if they think that it's a permanent loss, not sort of a temporary loss, they should apply for EI. And in doing so, what will happen is when they apply, they will get actually the CERB amount until the end date for CERB, which currently hovers in July. We don't know if that'll be extended. Once that finishes, they will actually be reverted back to regular EI benefits, which will go on, I think the max is from the date you apply, it will go on for 45 weeks. And so there are sometimes strategic questions around what is the better way to apply. I think for people who have long-term loss of employment and they do qualify for EI, they should apply for EI. They will still get the CERB amount for the period of time that everyone else does, and then they will go back onto EI. People who are on CERB, if when CERB ends, they still are not able to go back to employment, should also be able to get back onto EI. So the federal government is taking a very flexible approach, understanding that the situations of everybody are quite different. So those issues, have already been contemplated, and we understand that there will be a flexibility applied for people in terms of those benefits. A lot of questions have come to us about returning CERB payments, right? People who applied but couldn't figure out whether they qualified, which is completely understandable. We tell clients frequently that when the CERB came out, it was still confusing for people about whether they were eligible or not. And we tell people it is okay if you applied and received it and maybe now you realize that you are not eligible. That is okay. There is no discussion that we've heard at the federal level that anyone will be penalized for accidentally applying, which is a concern for some people. What they have said is that if you believe you are ineligible, you can return the CERB. So it's really a factual question for your clients around whether they want to or need to return the CERB or not. And now, as of yesterday, CRA actually has provided a very detailed process by which you can return the CERB. So I encourage you to look at it online. It came out yesterday. It gives you very clear instructions on how to do it. Whereas before, I think clients were saying, hang on, hold on to it, we'll give you a process. That process is now up on the website, and you can actually take a look and help clients. The decision around whether to return the CERB is going to be individually based, right? For some clients, if they really have no income and are not eligible for any other type of income, they may need it, right? In reality, the CERB will be a taxable income. Everyone will get, I think it'll be a T4 or a T4A slip indicating how much they collected in 2020. And when they pay their taxes, they have to report it. So decisions can be made at a later date that money is due back. I have clients who are in such a bad way that I say, you know what, it's okay. If you've incurred a debt, you need to live. You need to live before worrying about your debt. And so if you've incurred a debt, that's something to deal with. And, many people will advocate, including us, including OCASI, including Color of Poverty, for forgiveness, for an application of a policy for returning the money that favors low-income people. So potentially forgiveness, potentially waiver of repayment, all of those things. None of that has been discussed yet, but definitely I think that advocacy will absolutely go on. The other piece that we're talking about at the federal level is the more newly announced Canada Emergency Student Benefit. And the big question that's come up at our clinic is international students, and are they eligible for the Canada Emergency Student Benefit? So we've been told by several members of parliament that international students will be eligible, but I'm sure if you go online and try to do research, the details of the program are not actually available yet. So much like the CERB, it's probably best to wait and not answer questions in the sort of vacuum of no knowledge, right? What we have been told actually is that the CESB application may actually be released on May 15th, which is I think this week, right? So we will know very shortly what the eligibility. The application process will be similar to the CERB. People will need to have a MyCRA account or another mechanism to apply. So if people are considering it, they should start preparing to be ready to apply, at least at this point. And we will know in much more detail, and we will share with you, and OCASI will share with you what the details of what we get on the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. The other pieces at the federal level, there are many pieces. The Canada Child Benefit. So the Canada Child Benefit starting in May will give a flat rate $300 increase to clients. So clients should be seeing that now or shortly in their payments. What did not change, unfortunately, is that the eligibility for the Canada Child Benefit is still the same. So if you were not eligible for it before, you're still not eligible for it now. One of the huge campaigns that Color of Poverty, OCASI, SALCO have all been working on is busting open that eligibility for the Canada Child Benefit, that it should not be tied to immigration status, that it should be tied to the needs of children in Canada. That change has not come, which is really disappointing. As employers, we are also looking at the temporary wage subsidy, the 10% wage subsidy. I know that more recently there was a more clarity on how to apply it. And my understanding very, very basically, because I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of the math, is you then can pool all of your salaries, cut 10% off, and then there's a cap. So if you go above the cap, you can't claim anything above the cap. That's really basic math. That's sort of like my grade 5 explanation of the temporary wage subsidy. But absolutely, in my reading of it, most of our organizations should be eligible. The one that is a little bit more confusing for us is the Canada Employment Wage Subsidy, the one for employers to have up to 75% wage subsidy. In my reading of it, we have to really look at whether we've had a revenue drop, right? So we can pull out all of the grant revenue from governments, from all of that. But we then have to look at what is our actual revenue. And I'll speak only about SALCO. Our actual revenue outside of grants is minimal, very tiny, right? And then we have to make a consideration of, did that revenue really get impacted by COVID-19? Which in our case, it didn't. It was very minimal to begin with, and it hasn't really been impacted. But situations where it could be impacted are organizations that do social enterprise, fee for service, all of those kinds of things in all likelihood have reduced because of COVID-19. So you have to do that type of assessment. I suspect if you get the wage subsidy and then when you file business taxes, it turns out that you were not eligible, it'll be a similar situation to the CERB where you may owe taxes back, although that hasn't been said. That hasn't been said, I just suspect it. So that's sort of the pieces on all of the income entitlements at the provincial and federal level, some of the healthcare stuff. In terms of immigration, I didn't prepare a lot of updates, but I'm happy to answer immigration related questions in our town hall. Some of it can be quite complex. It's usually very dependent on cases. So I'll leave it at that and turn it back to Debbie to open up the chat so that we can all chat together. I'd love to hear your experiences, and I'd love to sort of pique your interest in thinking about the idea of collecting the stories of the people you're seeing, collecting the information, so that when we sort of look back on how we did, we can really dig deeper into talking to our governments, our providers, all sorts of people about all of the vulnerable people who are still falling into the gaps, right? And those inequities that existed previously that are sort of busted wide open.
Good. Thank you very much, Shalini. That was very thorough and comprehensive. I'm hoping that, Amina, I think you had a question about updates on international student benefits. I hope your question was answered, and we'll wait until May 15th to see what sort of clarification is being offered. Your next two questions, Shalini, is around Ontario Works and ODSP. And I think there are similar questions. Is OW, emergency assistance, is it automatic to all OW recipients, or do people need to apply? This is the Ontario Emergency Fund.
Yeah. So OW is not emergency assistance. So you should think of it as two separate programs, right? So you have OW, which is social assistance, and anybody can apply for Ontario Works if they're not already on it, if they're eligible. So they have to be low income, they have to have a certain type of immigration status, they have to meet the asset level criteria to be eligible. That's one piece. And that piece is going to be an ongoing monthly payment with a drug card, right? So if you're eligible and you need it, your client should be applying. Ontario Emergency Assistance is separate. The application for Ontario Emergency Assistance is online, and what I can do actually is we've made several of those applications. I have a blacked out version of one that I printed off online, which shows you every question that is asked. I'll send that to OCASI to send out to all of you so that you will know that when a client goes online to apply, that will be the questions that are asked, so they can do a little prep and be ready to answer. So the Ontario Emergency Assistance is a different thing altogether. You apply online. If you cannot apply online, there's also a phone number. It's a centralized application. What happens is once you apply, it gets passed on to the region that you live in. And a caseworker from Ontario Works from that region will contact your client to verify the information and start the benefits, but it is not Ontario Works. It is not social assistance. And it very clearly says this is for people who do not want to apply for social assistance or for Ontario Works. So that's the important distinction. I have to tell you, I've done about 10 or 11 applications now. From the time we put in the application, the client has been called back within 1 to 2 days, and money is in their account within 1 to 4 days. So it's a very, very fast process. Applying for Ontario Works is not as fast.
Thank you, Shalini. Do you remember what the amount is for the emergency fund?
So there is no set amount. That's a great question. They do not have a set flat rate. What they are doing is making a decision based on your needs. So I have some clients who have been able to meet their basic needs, rent and food, but have extraordinary medical expenses that they can't pay for. So in those cases, Ontario Works has asked them, well, what roughly are the expenses that you're not able to cover? And then they will cover that. In other cases, it's been higher. So I've had clients who've received $700 or $800 a month. I've had clients who've received $200 a month. So it's sort of dependent on what your needs are at the time, and they'll make that assessment when they contact the person.
Thank you. This is a question around pensions, Shalini. What will happen to people on the federal pension who are outside the country for more than 6 months due to certain countries having travel restrictions? Will they be penalized in regards to the Guaranteed Income Supplement, the GIS?
So that's a really, really great question, and it's one that the federal government hasn't answered yet. So I wish I could give you more clarity. Discussions are taking place in terms of extending the eligibility. The problem that I've heard in response is that Canada is actively seeking to bring back Canadian citizens and permanent residents from other countries. So it's sort of a factual question around, are you really stuck overseas, right? And in some cases you will be, and in some cases you won't. But the government has not made a definitive statement on whether you will not get the GIS, or even the OAS, I think, has some concern, although I think you can collect the OAS while out. But so they haven't made a definitive statement yet. And I think the reason is because they're sort of waiting to see how long this continues. And if those travel restrictions are lifted, the expectation will likely be that they will want people to come back. So when clients contact us and say, I'm stuck, I can't come home, we actually kind of take a look at that. And we have worked with several clients to repatriate them back to Canada from places in the world through embassy assistance in those places. So you kind of have to speak to your clients, and there is no guarantee at this time that they won't be cut off if they stay out.
Thank you for that. Are students under 18 eligible for the Students Emergency Fund, especially given that they can't have a CRA account?
Right, so that is, well, I think that's an interesting question, because you can have a SIN under 18, right? So we've raised that. I've had a SIN since I was born, obviously, like that a lot of people do, and I've been working since 14. So it's still unclear. I actually was trying to research that question in particular last week, and what is on the information on the government website is really still unclear around kids under 18 and whether they'll be eligible. So there's two pieces, right? There's the emergency student benefit, which it looks like they may not be eligible for, but we'll know more about that really soon. But there's also this piece that we are looking at around students who volunteer on COVID-related activities, getting that $5,000 credit towards study. I suspect that's also only going to be for post-secondary students. So we're going to have to take a look in more detail. And unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you, and I certainly don't want to give you wrong information. There is no clarity yet on what happens with students under 18. What we keep getting told is that the government is actually going to be sending out notices, and if people have already received them, that Canada Summer Jobs and other programs are all going to get funded at 100%, so that students should be able to get jobs, right? So we'll wait and see on that. But in terms of other students under 18, we're still unclear on whether they're going to be eligible. There was a process for CERB to not apply by the online mechanism, to call in if you needed to. So hopefully, if they make the determination that all students can apply and you don't have a CRA account, there will be a processing mechanism for those students who don't, because they absolutely can't, right? So they're aware. I think the federal government is definitely aware of that situation, but I'll be able to give you more clarity on that. I think we all will once we get a lot more detail, because it's very vague right now.
Thank you. If someone applied for CERB and got it, then when should they reapply again, or will it be automatic?
No, we've been told that you have to reapply every month, because if your situation changes, you suddenly get a job, which I haven't heard of that happening during this time, then you may become ineligible. So I think my understanding is that the reapplication for May is today, May 12th, I think. So everyone should be going back on their My CRA accounts regularly and just reapplying monthly, because the eligibility criteria can change depending on your circumstances. And if you're on EI, you should continue to do your reporting as well. They require reporting, particularly online or by phone, about your activities during EI, and that still continues.
The next question, for refugee claimants that were informed they were accepted as convention refugees at their hearing, but have not received the written notice of decision, would they be able to access benefits like the Canada Child Benefit, or will they be considered ineligible until they have received written notice of decision?
So this is an ongoing issue for us that predates COVID, right? And there's been no change at the federal level. So in my experience, until you have the confirmation, you all my clients have had difficulty applying, right? And so I would say, what I would say as a lawyer is they should still be applying anyway, and then they should attach themselves to a legal clinic or services that can advocate to see if we can move it. We very much would like to fight every one of those cases to push the process forward to a much more equitable process for our clients. But as it stands, it doesn't seem like the government has changed its approach to eligibility for Canada Child Benefit. So I would say that those clients may still get decisions saying they're not eligible until they can provide that documentation. I think, though, there's a very strong argument to be made that that should no longer stand.
Yep. Next question is around sponsored people. Can a sponsored person be eligible for CERB without consequences for the applicant?
Yeah, absolutely. So CERB is not, so when I sponsor my parent, I will be in default of my undertaking if my parent collects social assistance. That's the term in the immigration legislation. Federal entitlements are not considered social assistance. So collecting any federal entitlement will not cause me to be in default. What we are still fighting about is if I lose my job because of COVID and my parent is not eligible for CERB, they didn't work, they can go on social assistance. We should not be penalized as sponsors for them collecting social assistance during this extraordinary time. That is an advocacy piece that OCASI has taken up vociferously. We have taken up vociferously. Color Poverty is taking up. Many people are. We do not have commitment from the Federal Immigration Department yet that if you collect Ontario Works or Ontario Disability, that your sponsor won't have a default in their undertaking. We do know that anything collected at the federal level is not social assistance. It will not impact the sponsor.
Thank you. Next question. Is there any help for persons who are undocumented?
I mean, yeah, absolutely, right? I mean, legal clinics work with undocumented clients all the time. I'm working with several clients. Our clinic is working with several clients around regularizing immigration status. Those processes are going on as is. In terms of healthcare, there are a series of networks to work with undocumented clients or community health clinics. Hospitals now with advocacy should be covering care, and there's advocacy around doctors outside of hospital. Of course, many not-for-profit agencies, some work with non-status people, some don't. So there's quite a large network of people out there who can support. There are a lot of groups who are doing work around migrant workers in particular and undocumented workers and the precarity in which they're working, the unsafe way in which they're being forced to work and live underground. So depending on the area in which the person needs support, there are resources out there.
I think they're talking about financial support.
Oh, for undocumented workers. Okay.
Yeah,
so
OW. Yeah.
So that's a really challenging piece. So that's a great question, and this is what we say. So what the legislation really clearly says is that if you're an undocumented person without any status whatsoever, in order to be eligible for social assistance, you have to put in an application for permanent residence. And prior to COVID, we would contemplate this for clients too. We would have clients sitting in our offices with absolutely no income support and no ability to work, which is the case right now in particular, right? And we would be scratching our heads thinking, what can we do? In those cases, the most common practice was to make a decision around whether we could put in a humanitarian and compassionate application with the idea that once that application goes in, those people become eligible for social assistance. Whether to do it or not is not a matter of course, right? It depends on each client's fact situation, and there's downsides to it. There's downsides to applying for immigration when your case is not strong, and there are upsides to it in terms of what supports and what arguments can be made. So for somebody who's undocumented to get that income support, there has to be an immigration piece to it. So that's where I would say to people that that's where you want to do a consultation with a legal clinic or somebody who practices immigration law to figure out what could reasonably put in that would make them eligible for that support. Other than that, there isn't. So that's a big hole, right? That's a massive hole.
Yeah, and just briefly, and the question is coming from Dean Christie. Just briefly, Dean, OCASI has been working with a series of our agencies in Southwestern Ontario and Ottawa and Toronto We were able to secure some money from 2 foundations, certainly not enough, but hopefully some of the undocumented folks who you know, Windsor, London, Kitchener-Waterloo, Niagara, Hamilton, St. Catharines area, Toronto and Ottawa, as I said. There are a number of agencies who will be working with undocumented folks to try and get some dollars to them. Not a lot of money, only $200,000, and we know that's going to go very quickly, but trying to at least give people some funds in their pockets to be able to support themselves during this difficult time. But we're continuing to advocate on the provincial level, as Shalini has said. The next question, Shalini.
There's one more on that actually that I'm thinking about. So what is not as clear is who's eligible for the Ontario Emergency Assistance. Right now, it only says tourists and visitors are not eligible. Undocumented people are not tourists, they're not visitors. So what I also would suggest if clients want to try is to make the application for Ontario Emergency Assistance. There's an ability to explain what your status is and that we should be pushing for undocumented workers to be getting that assistance. Nothing in what they've indicated says that they're not eligible. I certainly think Ontario Works workers will put their hands up and say, well, if you're not eligible for Ontario Works because of immigration, you wouldn't be eligible for this. But that is not the way that the emergency assistance is worded. So there is a possibility there to make those applications. And I would love to get feedback from you on if they're denied, what is the reasoning. So that's a piece that we can actually push forward.
Thank you for that. Next question. For 70% wage subsidy, can revenue drop be only for 1 or 2 months during this period? Is the agency still able to apply for that specific month?
So is that the temporary wage subsidy or the—
No, this is a 75% wage subsidy.
75, so the Canada Employment Wage Subsidy.
That's right.
Okay, so I like to be frank, I don't have like I don't have in front of me the very detailed nitty-gritties of how the CEWS is working, but my understanding is that they're looking at it on a monthly basis. And so I think they'll be tracking monthly, but I think that's a question that I could just take back and follow up for you more properly, because it's quite a technical question and I don't have sort of the technical answers here today.
Thanks for that. We'll get back to you. Ontario Emergency Assistance and CERB, how are they coordinated? Is there support for a newcomer? Sorry, I was mixing up the questions. So the question is Ontario Emergency Assistance and CERB, how are they coordinated?
So no, they're not coordinated, because technically if you're getting the CERB, the $2,000 a month, you shouldn't qualify for the Ontario Emergency Assistance. The Ontario Emergency Assistance is very much for people who don't have income to meet basic needs. So if you report to them that you do have this $2,000 income from the CERB a month, then they're going to take the position that you have enough income to meet your basic needs and you wouldn't qualify for the Ontario Emergency Assistance.
Thank you. Next question. Is there support for a newcomer who is a new landed immigrant who is still looking for work, but who might not be eligible for EI, CERB, OW, or ODSP?
So if they're a newcomer who's looking for work and low income, I would say, why aren't they eligible for OW? Right? If they're a newcomer permanent resident, they're automatically eligible for OW if they can't work and they're low income. Where they become ineligible is if they have assets and savings over the asset limit, right? Because Ontario Works will come back to them and say, well, you got to spend that down to the asset limit before we'll let you go on social assistance. So those newcomers, it will depend on their status. But most of the questions we've gotten, and you can clarify if it's different, have been from people who are new PRs, so people who have come recently, who've landed and obviously cannot find employment. Those people are 100% eligible for social assistance if they meet those asset and income criteria.
Thank you. If a student had worked part-time last year and earned $5,000 since May 2020, due to COVID-19 only earning like $350, can they apply to CERB or should they apply for the student benefit?
So Debbie, does it say that in 2019 they made $5,000?
Yes, it does. Yes.
And is there information on whether that person is going to be doing study full-time or anything?
They're being called a student, so I'm assuming that they will.
Okay. I mean, it's a factual question because the CERB has the following requirements. You've had to have made $5,000 in 2019, and your income from employment has to have reduced because of COVID-19 after March 15th. So hammered into our heads in all our calls with CRA is that March 15th date. So in that situation, you have to look at the student and say, after March 15th, did they have a reduction in employment income? If the answers to all of those are yes, I believe that they should qualify for CERB. If you're not sure, I would say hang on and see what the Canada Emergency Student Benefit details are, and then make the determination of which one is the better fit for your client.
Good. This is coming from, this question is, I have a client who has been sick for a long time, since mid-January, and has been hospitalized. She's recently discharged. She was discharged on May 5th. She lost her job due to illness, but she cannot go back to work due to COVID-19. Does she qualify for CERB?
She lost her job due to illness.
Illness, yes.
Okay. So as long, again, the CERB is really, it's two pieces. Did she make 5,000 in 2019? Check, right? And then did she have loss of income after March 15th because of COVID-19? It seems like she does, because she now cannot go back to work. So I would say yes. Yeah. And for that client, if there is a significant illness issue and they're low income, you should also consider whether they may be able to apply for Ontario disability, right? And those applications are going ahead and being processed. We got a note this morning that they're being processed, that forms will be sent straight to doctors for processing. And what's interesting is that I suspect because less people are applying, the processing time is actually a little bit faster, right? So there are two pieces to that. I think yes on the CERB, although you can reach out to me directly so that I can get a little bit more factual detail from you. And then I think also think about Ontario disability if that's a possibility.
Good. Next question. Is the Ontario Emergency Assistance only for permanent residents and citizens?
No, so that's a great question again. All it says is that you cannot apply if you're a tourist or a visitor. So I've helped a number of international students apply, and this was prior to understanding whether they'd be able to get the federal emergency student benefit. And we've helped people on temporary resident permits apply. So it doesn't say that. It says only visitors and tourists are not eligible.
Another question, again around sponsorship. People who are sponsored to Canada by a family member, can they apply for anything if they're still under the sponsorship of that family member?
Absolutely. So that was always the case, right? If I sponsor my partner to come and we have that 3-year undertaking, you know, if our relationship breaks down or I just don't want to take care of him, which I honestly feel like that even now, he can apply. So anybody who is sponsored to Canada, when they come as permanent residents, have the same entitlements to social assistance that others would. And if they had worked, will have the same entitlements to those federal benefits. The question that remains is, if my partner applies for social assistance, will I get dinged with a debt because of my undertaking? And that is not answered yet. So a lot of our clients, especially the seniors, the parents who come in, talk about not wanting to take the benefit because of what it might do to their sponsor, right? And I understand that, right? They're thinking about, you know, the child that sponsored them and the debt that they will incur. The bottom line, unfortunately, though, is you really have to look at, can you live, right? And can you live is a higher priority than will somebody have a debt. But different people are going to think about it differently. And sometimes you have sponsors who pressure the sponsored person not to do it, but at the same time don't provide the income support, right? And in those situations with my senior clients, there's an element there of then elder abuse, you know, but they're very difficult situations.
Yeah. How much does Ontario Emergency Assistance pay, and for how long?
Okay, so they've just extended it. I think it will go now through July, and we'll just constantly see updates from the province, depending on what they decide around COVID-19, how long that will go on. There's no set amount. So the caseworkers will assess what the needs of that particular client are, and they'll make a decision on it. There is a max. I think there's a single and a family person max. I don't have those amounts there, but I can forward that back to you. But generally, they're doing these assessments based on the needs of the person.
Next question, and we might need some clarification here, Kamal. In terms of persons with expired social insurance numbers, are they eligible for CERB?
My understanding, there was confusion around that, expired SIN numbers, and saying that you had to have a valid SIN number. My understanding is actually there hasn't been consistency around that. I had 3 or 4 clients who plugged in expired SIN numbers and got the CERB. But I don't actually know if they've clarified now that it has to be a valid SIN number. I think they have. I think certain SIN numbers that end in certain numbers are also not eligible, but let me confirm it for you because I haven't seen anything new on it, and it was a question that kind of arose. If you have an expired SIN number, though, the question also becomes, do you have a CRA account, right? Or did it get deactivated, which I've seen for a couple of clients as well. So I think, Kamal, if you can reach out to me, maybe we can do a little bit more of an assessment of it.
Yeah. Next question. Do people have to apply for CERB often, like bi-weekly or monthly, or is it automatically deposited?
I think you apply in the first month, and then actually, yes, you have to reapply. And I believe it's monthly.
Thank you. What income support may be accessible to non-status residents?
Right, so we talked about that. For people without any immigration status, one option is to look at getting them some type of status that will be able to make them eligible for Ontario Works. Otherwise, the other piece is to look at whether they can apply for the Ontario Emergency Benefit. And that's going to turn on whether their non-status is that they're a visitor or tourist or something else. And then Debbie also talked about some of the maybe the private funds that are available for some income support for those people.
Yeah. Thanks for that. How can senior citizens renew their yearly GIS and old age supplements, especially when they cannot physically go anywhere?
So, I mean, the GIS is usually based on tax filing, right? And CRA now has released a whole host of free services to support people to do their tax filing by, I think it's the end of June now. And we've actually had several clients use that to do their tax filing. So I would really strongly recommend that for people who are getting any federal benefit that is related to filing tax, that's the GIS, the CCB, that you file those taxes by June 30th. And we haven't had issue with clients being able to do that remotely with the services. That being said, we work with populations who often don't have access to internet, don't have access to phone. So we've had to think about, as intermediaries, what kind of supports we can put in to facilitate that. So some of it has been clients mailing us their information so that we can scan it and email it off. So there are all sorts of ways in which everybody's trying to work around doing that. But we've been fairly successful in having people do tax filing and all of that kind of stuff remotely without ever having to see anybody. So one, I would say look at the supports that CRA is providing, and I think OCASI has either or will be blasting out information on that. And two, look in your local areas at those free income tax clinics, which are running remotely in most areas still.
Yes, and Shalini, when she talked about OCASI blasting out information, I believe tomorrow CRA and Service Canada will be holding webinars for our sector, for frontline practitioners and managers and those who work with volunteers on filing taxes. Amy, I believe it's tomorrow, and that information has been sent out, but we can certainly send it out again on the OCASI's issues list, and we'll have the leadership who the email usually go to drill it down to you. So all those questions can be answered there. Next question is an immigration question, Shalini. I have a couple of clients who have received the confirmation of landed status, but are unable to validate their PR status because of lack of flights and travel restrictions. Will they be able to extend the validity of the landed document, and how can they request the extension?
Yeah, that's fantastic. So it's a question that's coming up frequently. What you need to do is that client has to, and they can do this by a web message, contact the local embassy for where they live to let them know that they're stuck, they cannot enter Canada. And so automatically we've been told by immigration that they get in their passport a visa saying you have to come to Canada by a certain date to land. We've been told that those will be extended until the travel advisories are lifted and people can come to land. If you have somebody who's in Canada and says that they are ready for landing, so people who've done an H&C or an in-Canada spousal sponsorship, they are doing those landings for people who are already here virtually. So those clients will be getting emails, they'll be getting landed virtually, and then they'll receive their PR cards in the mail. So it's a two thing. If they're overseas, they should be contacting the embassy immediately to tell them that they're stuck and requesting the extension. It will be given.
Thank you. Next question. Could you please expand on the students' COVID-related assistance?
So this is this the Canada Emergency Student Benefit? So
I'm assuming so.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So the Canada Emergency Student Benefit will be for students who've obviously lost, generally what they're contemplating is summer job income, right? And so they have indicated as well that even students who are working but making less than a certain amount may be eligible as well. So I wish I could give you much more detail about the student benefit, but we don't have it yet. Much like the CERB, you know, in that 3 or 4 weeks between when they announced it and when the application came out, there was mass confusion about what the program would look like. So this time around, we've made the determination that we're just going to wait to get the clarity when the application comes out, and then there'll be a really clear indication. But that is the benefit that generally most students are going to be eligible for. There are other pieces though. There are some grant programs like students who volunteer on COVID-19 related jobs can get $5,000 towards their post-secondary education. So that to me doesn't sound like income support. It sounds like a credit towards your future studies, right? So I think the Canada Employment Student Benefit is the one that's going to be most relevant, but we just don't have enough detail to tell people who's going to be eligible, who's not. My understanding from meetings though with several MPs is that they're casting a very wide net, much like the CERB, which really most people got. We're not sure yet who's eligible, who's not, and that'll come later. That emergency student benefit is likely going to be available to a really wide net of people. We have been told that international students are going to be eligible as well.
Very good. Next question. Can the client collect pension benefits and EI at the same time?
Absolutely. So this is something I specifically had raised with Service Canada at a last call. We have a lot of seniors who collect old age security, but who also have to work, right, to make ends meet. We were told very clearly that they are still eligible for CERB, and in some cases, if they meet all the eligibility criteria for EI, they'd be eligible for EI. So getting old age security will not prevent you from getting CERB and should not prevent you from getting EI if you need it. There is a pretty significant understanding that more and more seniors are having to work now while collecting pensions just to make ends meet, right?
Will their old age pension be clawed back at a certain amount?
It will be. So old age security does take into account your employment income or any other income actually sources that you have. So other pensions. I can use my mom as an example. I'm sure she won't love it, but I'm going to use her anyway. You know, my mom worked for the provincial government, and so did my dad. My dad passed away. She gets survivor benefit from his CPP. She also now, as a retired person, gets her provincial pension. Because of the combination of two, she is eligible for OAS, but all of it gets clawed back because her income is higher. So those rules were always there, that OAS can be reduced based on other income. And of course, GIS will not be available to people who have high incomes, right?
Yeah.
I should say, though, that if you're collecting CPP retirement income, that does not get clawed back. OAS can, but CPP doesn't.
Yes, and then the other part of the question is, would the yearly application be automatically renewed? I'm assuming you have to reapply for old age security every year?
No.
No, I didn't think so.
No, once you apply for OAS, that's it. You get it. So
Thank you.
the thing that gets renewed every year is the Guaranteed Income Supplement, the GIS. So the GIS, which accompanies the OAS for low-income seniors, gets renewed annually based on what you have said in your income tax filing. But not OAS. OAS is there once you apply.
Okay, I think I missed a question here. Somebody's asking about an OCASI question. I read somewhere about the 200K fund OCASI has for precariously status workers. Is there any more information on this? Yes, the money is being distributed through a network of community-based agencies in Southwestern Ontario, Toronto, and Ottawa. Alos, if you contact Oriana@ocasi.org or Amy@ocasi.org, we will get you information about the agency in your region. The next question, any penalties for those who applied and got served and they're still continuing their work?
We haven't heard of any scheme for penalties for people mistakenly getting served, but in the scenario described, it doesn't seem like it may be mistaken. Like that's what it kind of rests on, right? There hasn't been any discussion that penalties are going to be issued by CRA. Certainly, if somebody's getting served and working, when they do their reapplication, they should be advising of their income, which should actually reduce their eligibility. But, you know, from a framework perspective, the CERB is meant to be for people who really don't have any other income and need the support, right? And so down the road, we could see that happen. We could see CRA absolutely has the ability to assess penalties if they want to. There hasn't been discussion of that right now. I think that's a good thing that there hasn't been discussion. I don't think you want to terrify people in such a terrifying time already. But I think there may be cases where they may consider it. It's hard to say, though.
Next question. Can a parent be penalized if he's in default for paying child support during these extraordinary times?
So that's a great family law question. I think the courts have actually not been clear, the courts, on what will happen with defaults on child support. But I suspect that they're going to be quite flexible in terms of their approach to why that default happened. So if you have scenarios where it's just really clear that this is a person who was on top of it and lost their income, that's going to be an issue. But the other piece in family law, though, then to think about is if there's a court order ordering child support and you've had a drastic change in your income, there may be a reason to go back into court and think about varying the child support order moving forward, right? So when you have the non-custodial parent who's paying child support, who's lost income or has had illness come on, oftentimes the family courts and family lawyers will say to you, you need to think about whether there's a need to go back to court and vary the actual child support order. In those variations, they can also look at varying any default, retroactive default that was owed from the date the change occurred.
Thank you. The next question, will you comment on issues of deportation during this period and hospital fee for those who are undocumented?
Sure. So we don't have a clear directive from Canada Border Services that they are not deporting people. What they've said is that they are still considering deportation for serious criminals. So there is immigration legislation that talks about serious criminality and what that means. So there has not been a firm commitment that we are not removing people. We haven't seen a significant number of deportations. I haven't seen at my own clinic clients contacting me about CBSA enforcement like at all, hardly, right? So I think they're taking a very cautious approach, but there is no actual commitment. So it would be dishonest to say that they're not trying to deport people. They possibly still are. I think there are incredible arguments to be made for deferral. So if you have a client who has a contact notice from the Canada Border Services or is in process of being removed from Canada, they should absolutely look at what legal supports they can get through clinics, through legal aid, through private bar, to ask for a deferral of that removal. And we've seen some media pieces around it, right? There was a case, I think in April, of CBSA trying to remove someone back to a part of China that was still quite unsafe at that time. And it took media advocacy and a huge push for them to defer that. So that to me says a lot about the different approach that different CBSA officers are taking. But at this point, deportations are still on the table. So we have to be a bit vigilant about making sure that those are deferred if they come up. Although I think it's getting less and less. And the second question was around, there was a second.
Hospital fees for those who are undocumented.
Right. So it's super clear. So there's actually, I think, a link in the handout that we're going to send you after this with the March 25th memorandum from the Ministry of Health on this issue. And there's been a lot of advocacy. So hospitals are not supposed to charge undocumented workers for COVID treatment and for non-COVID treatment. So when we talk about non-COVID treatment, what we're talking about is if I had to go as an insured person to hospital for something non-COVID related, and that's still a priority for treatment, the same person who's uninsured can go to hospital for that same issue and get treated, and they should not be charged. What is happening is there is significant inconsistency from hospitals around the application. Sick kids actually said they didn't even know. Sick kids, right?
Yeah.
Which is 2 doors down from Parliament, right? So you have to, at the front end, arm your clients with that knowledge. Some hospitals, when undocumented people come in first, before even treating, if it's not an emergency, will send them to finance to make arrangement for prepayment. So that is where you need to be vigilant around pushing back and saying, no, they don't have to pay, and here's the memorandum. It's really clear. And there are a number of people in the uninsured network and in OHIP for All who have been doing that advocacy. So people on that group are doctors who work in those hospitals. So if you need to connect with people who are in hospital, that group is brilliant. Like they will be able to do that, and I can connect you on those individual cases. Legal clinics are also doing advocacy for clients on making sure they get that treatment.
Next question. Does legal aid help with problems with OSAP?
Generally, no, but legal clinics do. And so, but so the work that legal clinics do is sort of very different depending on where you are. A clinic like Salco, I will work on issues with OSAP. Some clinics don't, but legal aid generally won't cover that. But if you're having an issue, reach out to your local legal clinic or reach out to us, and let's put our heads together and think of what we can do. I generally find that with the OSAP issues, just a call or clarifications or letters often do go a long way in resolving stuff.
Yeah, there's a request for us to send the instruction for returning the CERB. Yes, we will. And a reminder again, folks, on the right-hand side of your screen, under handouts, which is the last box, there are 2 handouts, I think, that we have posted so far. So the next question, so even a mother can apply for CERB if she never worked after maternity? Or let me ask it as a question, can a mother who has not worked after giving birth to a baby apply for CERB?
Okay, so again, you go back to the 2 basics, right? Did that person make $5,000 in 2019? And at March 15, did they lose income because of COVID-19? So it's a factual question, right? If the person was on leave, it'll be difficult to prove that when they come off leave, they lost income, like they actually lost a job, right? So it turns on the situation. There will be some clients who come off maternity parental leave and we're supposed to go back to work, right? And those people are then told you can't come back to work, we're laying you off because of COVID. If they had the $5,000 in employment income in 2019, then yes, right? The other question then though is for people who seemingly don't become eligible for the CERB in those situations, is there a way to make them eligible for regular EI, right? To go off parental leave and go on to regular EI. There are mechanisms in EI law that allow you to go back further than 12 months to make the hours. So it'll be a very fact-based answer for that client on what options might be available.
Thank you. This is a long question. This is a colleague who works in the support program at one of our member agencies. She wants to share that the challenges that caregivers faced before the pandemic are even more intensified now. She says caregivers who call us saying that their employers are forcing them to apply for CERB and to stay working for their employer's home unpaid. Many are not allowed by their employers at all, even to do grocery shopping. And many are laid off. Those whose work permit is expiring soon or has expired are particularly vulnerable. Because they have employer-specific work permits, they have to look for an employer that is willing to apply for an LMIA. Most clients are being forced to pay the LMIA fee of $1,000 and the agency fee of $1,000 to $2,000. Some who are eligible to apply for PR have to write an English test, but testing centers are closed. I got a client who just finished college. I'm sorry. So what should they do? We absolutely get it. It's one of our advocacy priorities as OCASI and as Color of Poverty, Color of Change. The Caregivers Network has been working their behind off in terms of getting some clarification from the Department of Immigration and Citizenship to address these issues. Shalini, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I just have one more thing, because you're right, there is not a lot of clarity, but what I have been doing with the caregivers who come in is if I can identify any form of abuse, so financial, employment abuse, any form of something that I can turn into quote unquote abuse, I have been applying for the pilot project for the temporary, the vulnerable worker work permit. So if there is an element of abuse, and some of what you were describing is absolutely abuse, forcing people to apply for benefits and then making them work for free, absolutely. Those people may be eligible to actually apply for the vulnerable worker work permit, which will give them an open work permit that will be extended beyond the date of their closed work permit. And that will actually free them to leave that employer if they need to and seek assistance elsewhere if they want to. So it really will depend on what the client wants to do, which is always the starting framework, because what the law is and what is practical for people are often miles apart, right? So if you have clients who you think might be eligible for that vulnerable worker work permit, they should be applying. That is an area that legal aid should be covering for certificate, because violence is a priority. That is an area that clinics that do immigration are doing across the board, and we are having success on those applications. So that's one part of the fix if that works for the client, right? And then other than that, right, Debbie, there has been very little in terms of supporting precarious workers, including live-in caregivers, around these types of abuses. So we'll have to keep pushing on that. But consider whether that might be an eligibility piece, and you can reach out to me and we can have that conversation offline as well about whether that would be of value to the clients you're working with.
The next question, again, around students and access to support. I have a client who just finished college and is doing placement. Do you know if he qualifies for students' assistance?
So unfortunately, again, I'm just not sure. I suspect he will, but until we have the very clear details, because what we have right now is so vague coming from the federal government. And I think it's because they're still putting it all together, although they must be close to it if they're planning to release the application this week. So I think what we can commit to doing is working as a group through Color of Poverty and OCASI and the legal clinics to give you a much more clear document probably early next week or sometime next week if we get those details that will answer those questions. But as it stands now, I'm really not sure.
I think you've answered this question before, but there's a bit of a nuance here. What about new landed immigrants that came through Group of 5 or other sponsorship? Are they qualified for OW?
That's a bit of a trickier question, right? So they come as permanent residents, but there's an attached requirement to be supported by the people who sponsored them, right? But I would actually say that depending on the situation, if that undertaking has somehow been challenged by what's been happening around COVID-19, like the people who sponsored are now also low income, that you should be eligible. Nothing in the law says that you're ineligible. It actually simply says if you're a permanent resident, you can get social assistance. So on the straight reading of the law, that shouldn't be an issue. What it might do to the immigration process is still the question mark, right? That if this Group of 5 has an undertaking to support you and you collect social assistance, do they incur the debt? That's unanswered still.
Next question. If the international students graduated from university and have applied for work permits during COVID-19 but couldn't find a job at this time, is there any support that they're able to get?
Okay, so that's probably a big group of people, right? Because we have a massive group of international students in Ontario. Yeah. So the person's graduated, they're getting the post-grad work permit, but they can't find a job. So this is a scenario where we have to look at, do they meet any of the requirements for CERB? Like, do they have previous income? And did they lose, like if they had, what we've had is a lot of people who've had job offers who have been rescinded. And so if that happened post March 15th, we'll make an assessment of whether they can apply for CERB. So that's one piece. The second piece then is social assistance, right? And this is a tricky piece for people who are here on temporary status, because on the one hand, I think there are strong arguments to say that temporary workers now who can't work can get social assistance. But on the other hand, we don't know what collecting social assistance might have on their eventual applications for permanent residence. So it becomes very difficult. So I think in those cases, the best thing is for those people to speak to someone, to have an assessment. I mean, ultimately, if you have someone here who has absolutely no income and can't survive, they should look to the Ontario Emergency Assistance first, because it's not social assistance and they're not a visitor or tourist, so I think they would be eligible. And after that, if the situation persists, we have to look at whether social assistance Ontario works. When I say social assistance in Ontario is the right way to go, or whether they're eligible under the CERB guidelines.
Okay. Do people with implied status, are they able to apply for the child tax benefits? And if yes, how can they prove that their PR or work permit application is pending?
That's a great question. So in order to apply for the Canada Child Benefit, you have to provide them with certain documentation, right? So you have to be resident and you have to provide them with certain immigration documentation. If you're under implied status, you likely don't have that documentation yet. So there may be an issue in terms of applying and then not being able to provide the prerequisite documentation that you're still waiting for from immigration. And that relates to a question that was asked earlier about refugee claimants, right? Waiting for the documentation. So the same kind of issue arises. What I want to say to all of you is that in the work that we're doing, we still want people, we want to push that away. We want to push the envelope on that type of decision making. So for those clients, it's likely that they may say they're not eligible, but I always take the approach that we're going to apply anyway. And on the off chance that they get it, great. If they don't, then there's a consideration of now, do we do the appeal and do we push back so that we can extend the law? The client has to be okay, obviously, with wanting to do that. Some clients will, some clients won't. But I think if you're not able to show the documentation, you may have a problem with the eligibility.
Thank you. Next question. If someone applied for WSIB at work that they never received as yet, can they apply for CERB? Number one, and will they have to return money if they receive WSIB later?
Okay, so I mean, I don't think they're ineligible from CERB. They could apply if they meet all of the criteria that we've kind of hammered home. What will happen though is at the end of the taxation year, they'll get all of their T4s, T5s for all of the income that came into them. And there may be a calculation that they might have to owe money back. It will depend on their income levels.
Yeah. If a worker under the in-home caregiver program applied for CERB or any other benefits, will that affect their PR application in the future? You basically just answered that.
Yeah, it shouldn't. It shouldn't. Collecting CERB should not impact immigration applications. Collecting social assistance can, but collecting CERB shouldn't.
And there's another question again around who is eligible to get the CERB if on Ontario works. I think the question is, are you eligible for CERB if on Ontario works?
Absolutely. So it's just a straight thing. And if they still had 5,000 in income in 2019 and they had a reduction or loss of income after March 15th because of COVID-19, they are eligible. That money will be reported to Ontario Works, and they will apply the income exception. So I think the first 100 is exempt and 200 at 50. There's a math thing there, and then after that, they will continue to stay on Ontario Works at a nominal rate depending on how much income they're getting elsewhere, and they will continue to keep their drug card. So yes, anyone on ODSP or OW who's been working part-time can still stay on social assistance and collect CERB.
Okay. Folks, we have about 8 more minutes with Shalini. So if your questions have been answered before, or if there are similar questions, I will scroll past them. So we have new questions. Shalini, this will be an interesting one. For the 5,000 income requirement in 2019 for CERB, what if this income was under the table? The client is worried that applying for CERB will trigger a CRA audit. What do you think of that?
So it's a great contemplation, because when we took a look at the application for CERB, it doesn't say taxable income, right? It says employment income. So to me, that means any income under the table or taxable, whatever, right? And they don't actually verify for you whether that income, how that income was obtained. They just want it to be employment income, and you just provide it. So technically, people who've worked under the table can apply, right? And I spoke to several women in particular, I think, who are doing in-house cleaning, so cleaning ladies who are working under the table, who have applied and are receiving it. So the second part of the question, though, is will you get penalized by CRA, right? That part we don't know, right? We just don't know, actually. These are just my musings now. This is not legal, a legal answer. My musing is that with the volume of people who've applied and the amount of work that would have to be done to actually go through and make eligibility decisions individually on all of this, that we simply don't have the resources for that to happen. We just don't, right? And so in all likelihood, there may not be consequences, right? But CRA has not said that. So when we talk to clients, all I can do is give my best point of view and say, but this is an off chance, right? But at the same time, I think, and I might be being optimistic here, but I do believe that at the federal level in particular, that there will be an approach to all of this that's quite humanitarian. Right? The approach will be in understanding the situations that people have been placed in, and understanding that this is an extraordinary time and Canada has to take extraordinary measures to support vulnerable people. So there are great arguments for not being penalized, but legally that is an unanswered question yet.
Good. How do you help clients who need to apply for their social insurance number, but Service Canada is not taking applications right now? Most workers are working from home, so they're not able to print out a form for the person to complete. And the person is not able to apply online.
Person's not able to apply online, but can't get the application form to complete and mail in. Is that the
That's
question?
right. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we've been in as many cases as we can printing out and just mailing things off to clients. But you're right, there's going to be gaps because many of us are working from home. So our capabilities around what we can do are difficult. I actually think that's more of an organizational question in terms of grappling at your organizations with whatever workarounds you can do, right? So I can only tell you what Salco does, which is we have one person who goes in sort of every other day. So in the scenarios where clients do need something that we can send out, we just do the needful from work, but that might not always be the case for everyone. I think from a practical perspective, it's almost impossible to get through to Service Canada on the phone. If you could, they would probably mail the application, but those are very challenging things. So I think it's a question of trying to figure out how to get the application into that client's hands, which, you know, different organizations are going to have a different response to that.
Yeah, there's another question around pensions. When a tax preparer prepares an income tax application or filings, does the GIS automatically get put into place if you qualify?
So I know on the first application you have to apply. What I cannot remember is once you apply initially, do you have to keep reapplying? I don't think so. I think once you apply first, then they will continue to look at your taxes to make the determination. But that's an easy one to answer. So let me actually check the nitty gritty if we can keep track of that question, and then I can actually send that back to OCASI to send out. So the question is, do you have to continue to reapply for GIS, right?
Be put into place once you file the tax.
Right.
So you're saying no, you have to put in an application for GIS the first time, and you're going to check to see if it then automatically.
The first time you have to actually apply, and you generally, the first time is when you're doing your OAS, right? And they will have the separate application form for GIS, and if you think you qualify, you fill out both, right? What I'm not 100% sure on, and what I want to get right for you is after you start getting it, how does the renewal keep happening every year? Because it is based on your tax filing, right?
Thank you.
So I'll get clarity for you on that.
Thank you. Apologies, folks, for all of the acronyms: OAS, Old Age Security, GIS, Guaranteed Income Supplement, all pensions. Quickly running out of time, there's a question around non-status and COVID virus. Yes, all hospitals are supposed to be treating everyone, regardless of whether or not our immigration status, for COVID-related and non-COVID-related symptoms and issues during this pandemic period. Next question. Somebody shared information that CERB applications they basically shared, you can read it in your file. We've answered the question about international students and social assistance. Did you want to quickly again, do international students qualify for provincial social assistance?
So I would say first and foremost, see if they can get the Ontario emergency assistance, because we're not 100% sure of what the immigration consequences will be for workers and students who collect Ontario Works. So if they can get the Ontario emergency assistance, try that first. If not, there's nothing in the law that says they cannot get that they cannot get Ontario Works. So what that means is when they apply, oftentimes though, their workers will tell them you're not eligible. And in an earlier training that CSALC did, they actually provided to OCASI a detailed letter that they use to say, no, you're wrong, they are eligible. So maybe you could refer back to that, those slides in that advocacy piece, which tells you actually how to push back if they're found ineligible, because they should be for social assistance. But what I am saying is we don't know what that will do to their future immigration implications. So if they can get the emergency assistance, which is not social assistance, that would be better.
Thank you. And there's another question around group of 5 and losing their jobs and their sponsored person going on OW, what the impact will be, and you've responded to that. Basically, we don't know if it will have an impact on them being able to sponsor in the future. So that's an unknown, but it's something that we will certainly be advocating, that no one is penalized during this period, especially if they've lost their jobs and aren't able to continue the support that they had undertaken. There's a yes, we will try as much as possible to send out answers that you haven't captured, along with the list of resources that Shalini have referenced. Again, there are 2 handouts in your handout pieces. I know some of you are having issues downloading, so we will try and email that out to you. The question is, if an eligible student applied for and received CERB, would they be able to switch to CESB once the application process opens up?
That's a great question. Yeah, so we actually don't know yet what the interaction between the two will be. If in fact the CESB simply goes, is a similar, I actually think it'll be a lesser amount from my understanding. So if it's a lesser amount and the person is eligible for CERB, there's no sense in making the switch because they'll get less. So we're waiting to see from the federal government if they're going to require people who are on CERB who are now eligible for CSB to make the switch or not. I don't think so. And so it's kind of a decision to be made around that. It doesn't seem like the CESB will go. One of the other questions is, would the CESB go on longer than the CERB, right? Because that informs whether you would also want to switch over. And we don't know yet what the answer to that is.
Thank you. There's a clarification that CRA's website is saying that the deadline for filing your taxes is June 1st, not June 30th.
Sorry, my apologies, June 1st.
Yeah, there's a question here about of grade 11 student volunteering and whether or not she will be able to apply for student benefits. My sense is no.
Yeah, I mean, my sense is no, but we're just going to wait and see what it comes out to. But my sense is this is mainly for post-secondary.
Yeah. Are Canadian students who are studying in the US eligible for the student benefits?
That's a great question.
That's a great question.
So we don't actually know when they say studying, whether it means studying in Canada or studying elsewhere, right? We know for CERB that working, when they looked at employment income, could be from foreign sources or domestic sources. So we don't know yet for the student benefit whether it would include people who are outside of the country and studying.
Yeah, what about folks who are doing online courses but are in country?
Right. So I think they will have a stronger argument that they're going to be eligible, but again, until we see the really clear details, we don't know. And one thing that's interesting too, I'll just say here, is that there's a lot we don't know, and there's probably a lot they haven't contemplated. So even once CESB is released, we still may actually have gray areas, because that's the same thing that happened with CERB, right? Even when it was released, we were still confused about who might be eligible and who might not. So I'm kind of keeping in my head all of these nuanced situations, and many people are, so that we can get clarity. On the question of studying overseas, we just don't know yet. I have a feeling that probably they won't be, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. So folks, apologies, but we've run out of time. There are lots more questions around folks on OW or ODSP and whether or not they're eligible for CERB. Once again, Shalini has repeated over and over, if anyone meets the qualifications for CERB, basically earn $5,000 last in 2019. Any place, actually, not necessarily here in Canada, has lost income post March 15th because of COVID. They're eligible for CERB. Please note that if they're on OW or ODSP, the province will claw back after a certain amount. Thank you. Again, Shalini, any last words?
Just if you, so the CERB piece is one where if you nail those eligibility requirements in your head, almost every question is answerable. So I would encourage people to go on the Steps to Justice website. They have an entire COVID-19 section, which has been fed by legal clinic lawyers primarily, which actually gives you updates and really simplified breakdowns of how to determine eligibility. And then also to encourage people, when you come across confusing cases, just reach out. I'm happy to speak to people. I've spoken to many OCASI agency members in the past. Reach out to your local legal clinics. We need to sort of work in concert to make sure that people who might be getting left behind don't get left behind. And hearing those stories helps us too in our advocacy, and hopefully will help everyone on the call too. And thank you for your time.
Alice, reach out to us and we'll connect you with Shalini about wanting her to do a webinar for caregivers. Thank you so much, Shalini. This has been very, very helpful and informative. Thank you all for participating and for your wonderful questions. Our next town hall number 2 for May, will be on Friday with AV Go. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, everyone. Thank you, OCASI staff. Goodbye.
You.
And getting out of here is always a challenge.